I think we're ready for the portrait. Everybody, how's the camera person going to give us a 3, 2, 1? Okay, we'll have some tests first. Are everybody's ready for the cameraman? We're ready, right?
Oh, are we ready to start?
Oh, the committee will come to order. We're meeting today to consider one resolution, but I want to go through the process because this is hybrid. Due to the COVID-19 public health emergency, members can participate in today's markup either in person or remotely via online video conferencing. For members participating remotely, your microphones will be set on mute for the purpose of eliminating inadvertent background noise. Members participating remotely will need to unmute your microphone each time you wish to speak. Please note that once you unmute your microphone, anything that is said in Webex will be heard over the loudspeakers in the committee room and subject to be heard by the live stream and C-SPAN. Additionally, I ask that members participating remotely use the raise hand feature of the software platform when you wish to be recognized. During recorded votes, you will need to unmute yourself to respond to the clerk once your name is called. In responding to the clerk, I ask, as I have in the past, that instead of just saying aye or nay, that you respond with a phrase like Frank Pallone from New Jersey votes aye. This will provide additional time for the voting member to be identified and made visible on the platform. Now, since members are participating from different locations at today's markup, all recognition of members will be in the order of full committee seniority, and during this markup, amendments will be sent to members electronically. Amendments, motions, and documents for the record should be sent to Chloe Rodriguez and Perry at the email addresses we provided to staff. I now recognize myself for an opening statement. I wanted to begin by mentioning that a lot of our members are leaving, some for different reasons. Some are going to the Senate, some are have retired, some were not reelected. But we will be missing a lot of members, and I obviously wish them all well. I'm not going to identify everybody by name, but we wish you well. We really appreciate what you've done and helped us in the last year, which was an incredibly productive year. But I do have to single out Don McKeechin, who, as you know, passed away. Many of us went to his funeral in the last week or two. It was a beautiful, uplifting funeral service. I don't think I've ever been to one that was so uplifting and so celebratory. But he was a tireless champion in the fight to tackle the climate crisis and courageous advocate on behalf of environmental justice communities. He's left behind an incredible legacy of hard work, and I know all of our thoughts are with his family and staff during this time, and we'll be keeping his legacy in mind as we continue that hard work. Now, today's markup comes at the end of a tremendously productive congressional session. Over the last 2 years, we've turned some of the biggest legislative solutions into the law of the land, thanks to the hard work of the committee members and staff, and it's been an honor of a lifetime to serve as chairman, I have to say. The committee has reported out 76 bills, of which 25 have become law. We passed the most significant climate law in our nation's history, empowered Medicare to negotiate the costs of prescription drugs for seniors, made historic investments to rebuild our nation's drinking water infrastructure and connect rural and underserved Americans with high-speed internet service, and responded to the COVID-19 pandemic by providing both the health and financial resources that Americans desperately needed during such an unprecedented crisis. And our work is not yet done. We continue, the ranking member, Mrs. Rogers, continue to work, and all of us on bipartisan bills that came out of the committee, and our hope is to see some of those included in the final omnibus bill that comes up next week or so. But I do say that with all that, today's markup is disappointing to me because in stark contrast to all the accomplishments that I mentioned, we're marking up a partisan Republican resolution of inquiry that will, in my opinion, have no real impact on everyday Americans. So I hope we can put aside these partisan issues and instead prioritize work that actually benefits the American people. I hope we're able to quickly report this resolution adversely to the House. And as I demonstrated back in July, this committee can come together in strong bipartisan fashion to hold big tech accountable. I know that this resolution deals with tech, but I do think that, generally speaking, we can do things on a bipartisan way to hold them accountable. Committee Democrats remain committed to taking action on urgent issues in this space that are ripe for, and in some cases already yielded bipartisan collaboration, like working to pass a national data privacy standard, creating a safer internet for our kids and teens, cracking down on rampant online scammers, tackling increasing levels of disinformation and misinformation, and ensuring all Americans can participate safely in our digital world. So I urge my colleagues to put people over politics and report this resolution adversely to the House. And with that, I would recognize Mrs. Rogers, the ranking member, for her opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As the 117th Congress comes to a close, I too want to express appreciation to every member of the committee for their hard work during this Congress, for the many issues that we were able to address during this Congress, all very important. And I also want to say we're going to miss all of you who are not returning. On our side of the aisle, in particular, Mr. Upton, former chairman of the Energy and Commerce Committee, just an extraordinary leader of this committee. I'll always remember when you were in the chair prioritizing the bipartisan work. You wanted to encourage that tradition on this committee and encourage the members to come together wherever possible. And I also will remember you for your leadership on 21st Century Cures with Diana DeGette and so many others on the committee, but making sure that America continued to lead in cures and breakthroughs. And you led the charge there. You set the high bar for all of us. And you've been just an extraordinary representative. And I also want to call out Mr. McKinley, who was our ranking member. And again, just such commitment to the people of West Virginia, as well as the country. And to all of the members who aren't returning, and we're going to, Steve Scalise, this is your last picture, I guess, for a little bit while you go be in a different role in the new Congress. But just appreciate everyone and hope we can wrap up soon and get home and come back for the 118th Congress. But I also, Mr. Billy Long, Mr. Kinzinger, Mark Wayne Mullen are all, who's the other one on our side? Anyway, okay. So just a big thank you to everybody. As far as today's resolution of inquiry, this is absolutely everything about putting people over politics. If there ever was a resolution that's about putting people over politics, it's this one. I think this is very important to the people all across this country. For years, big tech has been flagging, suppressing, outright banning conservatives on their platforms, simply for not adhering to their political agenda. They've denied all of these accusations, of course, including in front of this committee. And now, thanks to the recent Twitter files, we know that they were not being honest. Top Twitter executives were shadow banning conservatives, despite Jack Dorsey claiming otherwise when he was before this committee in 2018. And there's been similar reports showing that the Biden administration has been colluding with big tech to shut down speech, especially speech that runs counter to the president's agenda. In March, the Surgeon General stood at the White House podium and urged big tech to, quote, do more to silence people online. Fauci, the CDC, and others have used their official government positions to directly ask social media companies to pull down content or even deactivate their accounts. At every turn, Energy and Commerce Republicans have condemned these actions and demanded transparency from the administration and big tech. Free speech is foundational to America and our way of life. Free speech has led to ingenuity and innovation in everything from science to art. Free speech has been essential for entrepreneurs succeeding in every industry, including the tech industry. Our country was founded on this. Our founding fathers and mothers enshrined the First Amendment to protect against government officials abusing their positions of power and public trust, to try to silence the voices of those with whom they disagree. Free speech should be cherished and preserved, and any attempt by the government to force, coerce, or suggest private companies censor people's free speech is incredibly alarming and warrants scrutiny. I am pleased to report this resolution asking for more evidence of these conversations between big tech and the administration. I yield back.
Thank you, Mrs. Rogers. Now, any other member can give an opening statement, 3 minutes if you're the subcommittee chair for the committees, which would be consumer protection and communications on either side, and then 1 minute for anyone else. Does anyone want to give an opening statement at this time? Ms. Eshu is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've read this resolution. It requests the President provide extensive records on the White House's interactions on a range of topics, including the work of the Election Integrity Project at Stanford University and the University of Washington. I believe this is a misguided effort, and I believe it's a poor use of our time. Here are some points about the Election Integrity Project to consider. First, it's a nonpartisan collaboration, I highlight that, between the Stanford Internet Observatory and the University of Washington Center for an Informed Public. Its mission is to find and investigate false rumors and disinformation about election processes and procedures. Secondly, it focuses on a narrow scope of topics that are proven to harm the democratic process, such as attempts to suppress voting, reduce participation, confuse voters, or delegitimize election results without evidence. Finally, it does not investigate or evaluate anything regarding candidates, political parties, or their positions. That is not part of its mission. The people at the Election Integrity Partnership at Stanford and the University of Washington are trying to find ways to help us protect our democracy. This is a sacred system, our voting system, and I think at the end of the day, we all want this to be protected. We must protect it, and we must preserve it. And I, for one, appreciate the good work that these people are doing. And that's why I urge all of my colleagues to vote an unfavorable recommendation of this resolution, and I yield back.
Thank the gentlewoman. Mr. Latta, you're recognized for 3 minutes because the resolution comes under your subcommittee.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I also want to wish all of our retiring members all the best, especially our friend, the gentleman from Michigan, our Mr. Upton, the former chair of the committee, on his retirement and leaving our committee. Today, we will consider a resolution of inquiry sponsored by Mr. Clyde of Georgia to obtain information from the Biden administration regarding the attempts to silence voices online that haven't fit into the accepted liberal orthodox. This committee has a duty to conduct oversight of the Biden administration, especially when it comes to the government influencing what speech is deemed acceptable. At a time when the administration should be focused on lowering prices, unleashing American energy, securing our southern border, and fighting the fentanyl crisis, we have instead seen that voices being pressured in the social media companies to silence the voice of those with whom they disagree. Repeatedly, Biden administration officials have used their role to persuade big tech companies to shut down conservative viewpoints. This administration continues its attempts to regulate free speech, and its officials need to come before this committee to answer for their censorship efforts. This is fundamentally un-American, what's been occurring. I look forward to today's discussion. I urge my colleagues to vote to forward this request for information to the floor. And Mr. Chairman, I again thank you for holding today's hearing. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you. Does anyone on the Democratic side wish to make an opening statement? On the Republican side? All right, then that will conclude our opening statements, and we'll go to the resolution. But before we do that, let me just say that pursuant to committee rules, members' written opening statements shall be made part of the record, and please submit written opening statements electronically to the email address we provided if you decide that that's what you'd like to do. So the chair now calls up H.Res. 1476, and the clerk will report the bill.
H.Res. 1476, a resolution of inquiry requesting the President to provide to the House Representatives.
Madam Clerk, without objection, the first reading of the bill will be dispensed with. The bill is now considered as read. Without objection, the bill is considered as read and open for amendment at any point. I'm going to recognize myself for 5 minutes on the resolution, and then we'll see if others would like to also speak on it. I wanted to start by saying it's unfortunate, again, that in the waning days of this Congress, we're marking up a Republican resolution of inquiry. This resolution actually comes from a member who is not on the committee, seeking documents from the President that have not been previously requested, and all concerning what I consider a rather right-wing conspiracy theory. Just a few months ago, we wasted a lot of time, in my opinion, in this room, considering other partisan Republican resolutions of inquiry. There were 18 in total. And I think that the problem here is that this is not a resolution that really seeks information or conducts oversight, but is rather an abuse of the process and designed to keep us sitting here listening to attacks on the Biden administration. So while the lack of substance is beside the point, I guess, I would speak briefly on the issue as that it appears to raise. Resolution seems primarily concerned with the Election Integrity Partnership, a nonpartisan research collaboration founded in 2020 by Stanford University and the University of Washington, among others, to investigate disinformation spread on social media about elections, such as content telling voters to vote on the wrong day or vote illegally. These are well-meaning, qualified researchers collaborating with one another in an effort to protect the right to vote. And this is the type of work we should be encouraging. And it's particularly problematic that the resolution targets certain private citizens by name. The unrelenting attacks on government officials like Dr. Fauci result in harassment and in some cases death threats that discourage smart, qualified people from seeking out a career in public service. Similarly, attacks on private citizens that devote their time and efforts to pursuing big ideas to make our country better will only be discouraged, and others will be, like them, will be discouraged from, in the future, from doing the same. So I'm proud that under the Democratic leadership, this committee has worked to hold social media platforms accountable for the real-world harms that they have failed to address, including disinformation that threatens our democracy. And I'm proud that Democrats on this committee have consistently stood up in support of the First Amendment, particularly during the Trump administration when it was under constant attack. It's my hope that this work will continue in a meaningful bipartisan way during the next Congress. Unfortunately, this resolution is neither meaningful nor bipartisan. In fact, I think it's a waste of time, particularly right now, when so many of us are working so hard to avert a government shutdown and consider legislation that must be passed before the end of the year. Having this type of resolution introduced by an off-committee member without any attempt at all to engage the committee does not suggest serious oversight. And so I urge my colleagues to report this resolution adversely. I yield back the remainder of my time and ask if the ranking member or anyone on the Republican side would like to address the resolution at this time. Mr. Carter is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I move to strike the last word.
Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I thank my colleague from Georgia for introducing this resolution of inquiry. Mr. Chairman, I support this resolution of inquiry because the American people deserve transparency. For too long, big tech companies have been exploiting the ambiguity of current law. Additionally, the current administration has taken advantage of the well-known political bias of big tech by asking for favors. Republicans on this very committee, along with others in Congress, have repeatedly asked for any and all correspondence relating to the coordination between the two. We have yet to receive that information and instead have seen emails uncovered in the media. I do not wish to stifle the innovations and success that the internet has produced, but we now see a blatant violation of the American people's trust that their voices are being truly heard. It is clear that big tech companies are no longer providing a truly open forum for all points of view. I'm committed to holding big tech accountable. I'm disappointed we haven't used our committee to its fullest potential to do just that, but I'm eager to address these important issues in the new Congress. We must also restore accountability and transparency. We now know that when former Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey testified before this very committee and claimed that Twitter does not use political ideology to make any decisions, that was a lie. In fact, Twitter used tactics such as shadow banning and putting certain users on search and trend blacklist. Big tech also decides when to suppress legitimate sources of information when it does not align with their political leanings. I strongly believe in dialogue and diversity of opinions. It's imperative that Congress enact meaningful changes and ensure big tech and the administration are not colluding and targeting conservatives. I urge my colleagues to support this resolution of inquiry, and I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Anyone else want to speak on this? Is there anyone on the Democratic side? If now we go to Ms. Lesko is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move to strike the last word.
Gentlewoman's recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm in support of this resolution of inquiry. Since Elon Musk released the Twitter files, Americans can now see what Republicans, quite frankly, have always assumed. Twitter, and I think we can assume other social medias, was censoring the Hunter Biden laptop story, and conservatives and the federal government was feeding social media companies with stories and people to ban or censor. Now, it is apparent that mainstream media is really trying hard to cover up this story. In fact, CBS, ABC, and NBC News haven't even covered the story at all. Be assured that Republicans, now that we are in the majority, are going to get to the bottom of this. We're going to get to the bottom of the cover-ups and collusion with the federal government to silence free speech. Americans deserve this, and we will deliver. And I yield back.
Gentlewoman yields back. Did I see Mr. Soto's hand is up? You recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. On January 10th, just days after the violent January 6th insurrection, a congressional leader stood up. He lamented that social media companies should ban some GOP lawmakers who were outspoken in favor of the insurrection. He said, quote, "We can't put up with that." He questioned aloud, quote, "Can't they take their Twitter accounts away too?" Unquote, as reported by 2 New York Times reporters. That leader was Kevin McCarthy. Of course, it's understandable since we just had a violent insurrection and these traitors sought to overthrow the government. They tried to stop a peaceful transfer of power. And I call them traitors because they've officially now been convicted of sedition. Indeed, we have a robust First Amendment right, and we also know it's unlimited. Calls for violence, disinformation regarding a legally valid election, or lies about the vaccine, they can be regulated. The terms of service for a lot of these social media companies may also apply. Given the Republican leaders' reported attempts to silence your own colleagues, perhaps you should be investigating yourselves as well. And I yield back.
All right, the gentleman has yielded back. Mr. Joyce, I just want to apologize, not apologize, but we have our steering committee voting on, not me, but other members to be leaders, ranking members of the committee. So we're not going to take a break, but you know, some of us are voting electronically at the same time that we're here, so it's a little disconcerting. That's all. All right, Mr. Joyce is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I move to strike the last word.
Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It is clear that the Biden administration was working with big tech to censor conservatives. For the last 2 years, we have seen no oversight and, unfortunately, no accountability. Requests for information have been ignored, and our constituents have been left without the answers that they deserve. That's all going to change with the new majority of the House come January. Americans deserve to know how the Biden administration has been collaborating in order to oppress free speech and limit access to viewpoints that it disagrees with. As we move into the new Congress, I look forward to finding those answers. I look forward to having that accountability to the American people. Thank you, and I yield.
Joyce, anyone else want to speak on the resolution on either side? No? All right, hearing none, we'll proceed. You want a recorded vote? Yes, we'll proceed to a recorded vote. A recorded vote is ordered. Those in favor of adversely, so the motion is to adversely report. Those in favor of adversely reporting H.Res. 1478 as amended? No. H.Res. 1478 to the House will say aye. Those opposed will say no, and the clerk shall call the roll. So it's H.Res 1476, so if you're, yeah, if you're against reporting it adversely, if you're for reporting adversely, you should vote aye. I'm not, you want to know how I'm voting? I'm voting yes. And so, and if you want it, if you would like to be reported favorably, you're supposed to vote no. Okay? Everybody got it? You probably all had it. I'm the only one that didn't. All right. Clerk will we'll call the roll.
Mr. Rush. Ms. Eshu. Ms. Eshu votes aye. Ms. DeGette. Ms. DeGette votes aye. Mr. Doyle.
Doyle of Pennsylvania votes aye.
Mr. Doyle votes aye. Ms. Schakowsky. Mr. Butterfield.
Butterfield votes aye.
Mr. Butterfield votes aye. Ms. Matsui.
Matsui votes aye.
Ms. Matsui votes aye. Ms. Castor. Mr. Sarbanes.
Sarbanes votes aye.
Mr. Sarbanes votes aye. Mr. McNerney. Mr. McNerney votes aye. Mr. Welch.
Votes aye.
Mr. Welch votes aye. Mr. Tonko. Mr. Tonko votes aye. Ms. Clark. Ms. Clark votes aye. Mr. Schrader.
Schrader votes aye.
Mr. Schrader votes aye. Mr. Cardenas.
Cardenas votes aye.
Mr. Cardenas votes aye. Mr. Ruiz. Mr. Peters. Mr. Peters votes aye. Mrs. Dingell.
Dingell votes aye.
Mrs. Dingell votes aye. Mr. Vesey. Ms. Custer.
Custer votes aye.
Ms. Custer votes aye. Ms. Kelly.
Kelly votes aye.
Ms. Kelly votes aye. Ms. Barragan.
Votes aye.
Ms. Barragan votes aye. Ms. Blunt Rochester.
Aye.
Ms. Blunt Rochester votes aye. Mr. Soto.
Soto votes aye.
Mr. Soto votes aye. Mr. O'Halloran.
O'Halloran votes aye.
Mr. O'Halloran votes aye. Ms. Rice. Ms. Rice votes aye. Ms. Craig.
Craig votes aye.
Ms. Craig votes aye. Ms. Schreier.
Schreier votes aye.
Ms. Schreier votes aye. Mr. Han. Ms. Trahan votes aye. Ms. Fletcher.
Fletcher votes aye.
Ms. Fletcher votes aye. Mrs. Rogers. Mrs. Rogers votes no. Mr. Upton. Mr. Upton votes no. Mr. Burgess. Mr. Burgess votes no. Mr. Scalise. Mr. Scalise votes no. Mr. Latta. Mr. Latta votes no. Mr. Guthrie. Mr. Guthrie votes no. Mr. McKinley. Mr. McKinley votes no. Mr. Kinzinger. Mr. Griffith. Mr. Griffith votes no. Mr. Bilirakis. Mr. Bilirakis votes no. Mr. Johnson. Mr. Johnson votes no. Mr. Long.
No.
Mr. Long votes no. Mr. Bouchon. Mr. Bouchon votes no. Mr. Mullen. Mr. Hudson. Mr. Hudson votes no. Mr. Wahlberg. Mr. Wahlberg votes no. Mr. Carter.
Carter from Georgia votes no.
Mr. Carter votes no. Mr. Duncan. Mr. Duncan votes no. Mr. Palmer. Mr. Palmer votes no. Mr. Dunn. Mr. Curtis. Mr. Curtis votes no. Ms. Lesko. Ms. Lesko votes no. Mr. Pence. Mr. Pence votes no. Mr. Crenshaw.
No.
Mr. Crenshaw votes no. Mr. Joyce. Mr. Joyce votes no. Mr. Armstrong. Mr. Armstrong votes no. Chairman Pallone. Chairman Pallone votes aye.
Chairman, how is Ruiz recorded?
Mr. Ruiz is not recorded.
I vote aye.
Mr. Ruiz votes aye.
Any other member who's not recorded? Ms. Schakowsky?
Ms. Schakowsky is not recorded. Ms. Schakowsky votes aye.
Anyone else who's not recorded? Anyone else we're expecting to arrive? All right, you're all set? Okay, the clerk will report the tally.
On that vote, Mr. Chairman, the yeas were 28 and the nays were 23.
Okay, so the vote is 28 ayes to 23 noes. H.Res. 1476 is reported adversely to the House. Now, we're about to adjourn, and I think this will be likely the last time that the committee meets this Congress. So once again, I do want to thank everyone and wish everybody a happy holiday. And of course, we're looking forward to the new Congress and the new committee in the next year. So without objection, the staff is authorized to make technical and conforming changes to the committee prints consistent with the actions taken by the committee today, and the committee stands adjourned.